Much like the story of Icarus flying too close to the sun, Cyberpunk 2077 is a game comprised of astonishing highs and absolutely crushing lows. After almost 100 hours in the game, divided amongst 2 separate playthroughs, I find myself constantly wavering between frustration at missed opportunities and obviously cut content, and absolute elation when the game just clicks. So let's work through this together, chooms. Cyberpunk 2077 places you in the high-tech shoes of a mercenary named V. After crafting your specific version of this cybermerc in one of the most detailed character creators I've ever used, you're free to hit the streets in search of fame, fortune, and immortality. Except you only manage to find one of those things, and not in the way you'd expect. After a botched heist forces you to implant experimental corpo tech into your own body, you find your own mind being overwritten by an AI construct, the digital ghost of one Johnny Silverhand, a musician famous in his day for rallying protesters against the corporations ravaging the planet. As you shoot or sleuth your way across Night City, you'll have to find a fix for your futuristic virus before you're completely overtaken, your life itself overwritten. I found the main story compelling, albeit a bit brief, as most players will tell you that the bulk of this game lies within its side quests. Moment-to-moment gameplay in Cyberpunk skews towards the drive here, shoot there formula. And while at first blush that may sound like a bad thing, wonderful gunplay and satisfying progression make that simple formula much more satisfying to play through. I didn't mind wheeling up to my 20th gang hideout, as I might be traveling in a brand new vehicle that I worked for, or brandishing a fancy new piece of cyber tech that I wanted to test out. Or maybe I'd discover a new weapon that helped me tear apart my enemies even faster or smarter. Guns in the game have a comfortable weight to them, and audio feedback is satisfying. While combat earlier in the game feels a bit rudimentary, once you're double jumping through the air, shooting rockets out of your arm before quick hacking your enemies and bending bullets around walls, it all clicks in a gloriously frenetic ballet of bullets. I think it's worth applauding CDPR for finding success in a method of combat that simply wasn't present in their previous games. And while the game may stick to a specific formula for side quests and gigs, even smaller bite-sized encounters and jobs handed out by NPCs, when they break that mold, the game truly shines. I won't spoil the circumstances around these quests, but there are some standouts that have you scuba diving throughout lost parts of Night City, for example, or even hunting a serial killer skulking about the city, noir film style. These outliers, these unique experiences, whether they be small discrete quests or large set pieces, can make the game feel fresh and keep players invested. Side quests are also where you can pursue deeper relationships with the game's large cast of characters, some platonic and others romantic. CDPR does a fantastic job of really filling out characters' lives, personalities, and ambitions this way. Getting to know Judy after building a tentative friendship with her as a male V felt satisfying in the same way, or even more satisfying at times, than romancing Pan Am. Writing in this case was handled as carefully in either kind of relationship, which is much appreciated. And speaking of my relationship with Pan Am in my first playthrough, her side arc completely influenced my ending in a way that I've never seen in a video game. Again, another massive success. Speaking of highs and lows though, the overall look of Cyberpunk is a subject of contention amongst fans. Ask console gamers what the game looks like, and you might get one answer, while PC players can offer another perspective entirely. Having played on PC with ultra settings and ray tracing enabled, I found the neon-soaked, rain-slicked world of Cyberpunk to be a feast for the eyes. Watching rain trickle down the sides of cars and metal surfaces, with steam rising from the sewers, just felt incredibly grounding. The world itself felt real at its best moments, the stark difference between architecture found all around Night City offering a never-ending visual buffet. In my second playthrough though, I found myself in photo mode as often as I found myself just playing the game. For those taking their time, there's always something to admire, whether it be a striking set piece or just the architecture itself. The visuals of Cyberpunk on platforms that weren't blatantly underserved by CDPR were never the issue. The vibrant and violent world of Night City always served its purpose of drawing me in, keeping me in my play session for just one more mission. What took me right out was the gameplay itself and the systems that facilitate it, but more on that later. Driving around a beautiful cyberpunk city in a futuristic supercar was only made more fun by an awesome in-game soundtrack with a few standout songs. There was something about the edgy, almost angry electronic sounds thumping through your speakers that made you want to hit the gas harder and adventure through the snake pit that is Night City even longer. The music isn't the only standout, of course, as in-game weapons sounded punchy and satisfying, and most voice acting performances, especially amongst the core cast, were incredible, except for one very large exception. Which brings me to my issues with this incredibly conflicting game. Weak vocal performances by Keanu Reeves aside, Night City itself is not a complex simulation, it's a shiny diorama. Any poking or prodding instantly shows the strings behind the curtain, breaking a sense of immersion that CDPR has heavily invested in building. Combatant AI can be challenging, especially at harder difficulty levels. However, at times they're absolutely abysmal. Literally tripping over themselves, standing still, running into cover rather than behind it. Crowd and non-combatant NPCs mill about aimlessly, reacting unrealistically in various scenarios, and crowds of them look more like a push mosh pit than anything you'd see in a real-world city. And speaking of those crowds, advanced crowd tech was just one of the features that CDPR boasted during the game's press cycle, and yet it never materialized. Neither did a full transit system, an in-depth wanted system, and much more. There are many parts of the game that just feel abruptly thrown together or just unfinished. Paired with visual and physical glitches, it all just serves to pull the player out even further. At times, I'd glitch into walls, or my quick hacking interface would stop appearing mid-combat. I'd encounter T-posing NPCs during vital story beats, and more. And for reference, I played on a top-of-the-line gaming rig with a 30 series GPU and a Ryzen 9 CPU. By all accounts, I should have had a flawless experience. I also found myself frustrated with missed opportunities in terms of writing, blatant racial stereotyping, and quests that I found had no differences depending on my decisions, despite the illusions of choice, which was only amplified by my second playthrough. And so, even after penning this review, I feel conflicted, because I'm going to play more Cyberpunk even after writing this, even after being so frustrated with the game's shortcomings. That's not even to mention the sketchy business practices of CDPR's management. As a huge fan of the cyberpunk genre, I wanted this game to be the equivalent of Blade Runner 2049, but instead it feels more like Ghost in the Shell, the movie, not the anime. If I had to recommend the game, it would be to the hardcore CDPR fans or fans of the cyberpunk genre like myself, or the more patient among you. I think there's a game worth playing here, but those of you who've been on the fence might want to wait for updates, patches, and DLC, especially if you're on console. This game will be a must-have at some point. It just isn't there yet. The only question is, are you willing to wait?